So we're going to talk about 3 important court cases today. Marbury versus Madison. This is probably the most important court case, period, hands down. I don't know about hands down, but it established judicial review. This is basically what the Supreme Court does, what their function is. Up until Marbury versus Madison, it was kind of unsure as to what the judicial branch would do other than, oversee court decisions. Okay, it gives the power to the federal court to declare legislative or executive acts unconstitutional. Okay, and it perhaps gives the judicial branch the end-all, be-all power, if you think about it. Okay, it was under President Thomas Jefferson, and the Chief Justice, I should put Chief right there, Chief Justice is John Marshall. That means he was in charge of the court at the time. Then we've got Mccullough versus Maryland, and this establishes federal power in Article 1, Section 8, the necessary and proper clause. And it gives power to establish a national bank. It says it is constitutional. That is up in the air, and it will still be a huge argument, even later when we get to Andrew Jackson. Okay, and it says that the states couldn't tax the national bank, because that's what Maryland is going to try to do, is try to tax the national bank. Then we've got Cherokee versus Georgia Nation. It attempted to give the Cherokee Nation some autonomy, but it's going to end up backfiring. But we will find that enforcement will be important in this case. Okay? It's like my dog and my kid are magnets when I want a video trying to lecture. They come to my computer. So this is about Native Americans, the Cherokee Nation, and it attempts to give autonomy to this group of people, but it will not be enforced, and so it will actually backfire. So we're going to talk about it. So let's first look at Marbury versus Madison. Okay, Marbury, he was appointed to the Supreme Court by John Adams. He was one of the midnight judges. Remember that John Adams had issued the Alien and Sedition Acts. Remember that it violated the First Amendment, the right to free speech. So the Federalists, this kind of kills the Federalist Party. Jefferson comes in, a week or so before Adams takes over. Adams is going to push through some of these appointments, and Marbury is going to be one of them. But the actual paperwork doesn't get to Marbury. So Jefferson says to Madison, his Secretary of State, that's who's on the other side, Jefferson's going to refuse to give Adams appointments their paperwork. So Marbury says, it's just paperwork. I still have it. So it struck down a legislative act by Congress, okay, where they write mandates. It says you can't do that. So it gave the Supreme Court its power, okay, because it said, the legislative branch can't do that. So it can't exist. Okay, so technically the victory was for Jefferson, but really, in all actuality, in the big whole scheme of things, it is a victory for the judicial branch. Now, Marshall will say the serving of actual papers was arbitrary. So it's not that Marbury doesn't get the appointment. It's that the legislative branch can't issue a mandate. Okay? Hopefully that judicial review, that's the biggest thing. It says that the Supreme Court has the authority to declare something constitutional or unconstitutional. Okay? Then we've got Mccullough versus Maryland. Mccullough was the cashier of the Baltimore Bank, and he refuses to pay the state tax of Maryland. Maryland decides to tax the national bank because it says that the bank is unconstitutional, because they don't think it's constitutional. And that's, remember, Jefferson's going to argue about this too in Hamilton. Court said that Congress could establish a bank, so they could, and that the state couldn't tax it. So completely Mccullough win. Okay. They wanted the states to be put first, and they were not. The Constitution powers aren't subject to the states. Okay, it outlines that the powers that are given to the Constitution, to the federal government by the Constitution, they are not subject to the state's powers. So the states cannot go in and, in this instance, tax it. Then we got the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia. Cherokee Nation wanted the Supreme Court to stop Georgia from depriving them rights. Okay? Because you've got these nations in these states. And these states are trying to make the Native American nations do what they want them to do. Okay? And abide by Georgia law. Georgia wanted to control the natives. So they said that, look, we can't even rule that Georgia laws were applicable because the courts didn't have jurisdiction, because the Cherokee Nation was a domestic dependent nation in itself. So it said, we can't even rule on this. So it's null and void. In the end, this ruling hurt the Cherokees, okay? Because, they're going to win, but the Supreme Court wouldn't rule on the case. So by not ruling, in essence, they gave the state power, because who has more power when it comes down to the bottom line, when it comes down to a state or a tribe, a Cherokee Nation? The state's going to end up having more power. And as we see, especially when they get a president like Andrew Jackson later, things are going to be ignored and certain things are going to be enforced. And therefore, we're going to see the Native Americans being treated horribly once again by the federal government. So this kind of hopefully wraps these 3 court cases into a little bow for you and helps make sense of them.